Welcome, everyone. This is the September 2023 edition of our Data Science Student Group webinar series led by the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub. Today, we have three guest speakers that have a variety of science communication experience spanning different roles, platforms, media. But first, I'd like to make a quick introduction to the series. My name is JD Graham, and I am the Outreach and Engagement Specialist for the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub. We're a regional organization funded by the National Science Foundation, working within a 12-state area in the Midwest of the US, but we're also part of a national network of 4 hubs founded in 2015 to be a catalyst for bringing together different groups of people, spanning activities across academia, industry, government, and nonprofits, helping to build collaborations and partnerships between sectors. So as part of this webinar series, we bring together university science students, student leaders from official RSAs, as well as informal organizations to share best practices, their experiences in developing programmatic activities, and different ways of building local communities. Additionally, we recruit speakers to talk on a variety of subjects graduate and undergraduate science students care about, and that's what today is about. Our goal is to learn from each other and to help build a network of student leaders across the region. The Hub has this webinar series, a Slack community, and profiles of student groups on our website. So we encourage you to join future webinars and reach out to us if you'd like to participate with your group and be featured or be in a webinar series. Our future webinars will include topics like student data science leaders, conversations like this one on exploring alternative paths to teaching science, being in the field versus the lab or behind the desk, managing stress and anxiety in higher education, and helping international students navigate American universities. Now, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters. I just want to introduce them, give a little bit about who they are out there. We have Briana Brown, Outgoing Associate Director with the National Science Policy Network. Shifra Isaacs, data scientist, also a freelance writer. So she has worked at Annalect, and then she has written for Crash Course. And Ben Rush, one of the myriad of things he has done is be a creator, host, and producer of the podcast, Deeper Than Data. I'd really like to start with Briana. If you could just tell me a little bit about yourself, your role, the experiences you have had in science communication. Kind of just open it up with you.
Yeah, hello everyone. So happy for you to be here. So happy to be here with you in this space and community. So I'm Briana. I went to Florida State for undergrad, got my degree in biology and secondary STEM education. And then I got my master's in ed psych with a focus on research and statistics. And so a lot of my science communication background comes from science communication from science education. Yeah, I think early on I was very much like STEM literacy is super important, how we communicate with others, the importance of science in society. That's always been super important to me. When I was in undergrad, I did a lot of volunteer programs. I did an internship with General Electric. I worked with NASA, all kinds of different kind of experiences to try to see where I fit in best, what I wanted to do, and how I could leverage my expertise and community relationships. I've also been a community organizer for some STEM-based nonprofits. So really figuring out how I can use my content knowledge and translate that into actionable items for people in everyday life. So I currently work for a nonprofit. It's a STEM nonprofit for people who are come from science backgrounds who want to do public policy and do advocacy. So a lot of my science communication there is in like op-eds, writing briefs, and creating opportunities for people to share their science and how they can use it in your everyday lives to make some kind of government, I guess, level change.
How was that transition from education, which of course has a lot of communication, to maybe a more formal role with when you're being more of a PR way?
Yeah, it was a quick transition that happened at COVID, so I think it was kind of the right place, right time, and because I leveraged so many experiences outside of the classroom. Like I said, working with NASA was a big way to connect me with other just scientists in general. I also had worked with the Smithsonian, and people who were kind of serving as scientists or working with scientists and community-driven people in the same space, and so. Um, I think it was really easy. I think it had a lot more transferable skills than I knew I had going into education. But I think if you can teach, you can like do almost anything. So I think once I applied that mindset and it really shared how we could all work together to leverage our different skill sets, it just happened kind of organically.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people listening to this may have a chance to teach, whether it's formally or being a like a grad assistant or a
Absolutely.
tutor. It's really nice to hear that those skills aren't just relegated to that very specific activity, but in fact can be used in many different ways, and you're showing it.
Absolutely, for sure. Writing, the actual teaching part, all of it, researching, it's all relevant and connected.
Definitely. We'll come back to that. I'm going to give a chance for our other guests our guest speakers to introduce themselves and let us know how they got to be where they're at in science communication. Also, Shifra, could you introduce yourself again and tell us, look at this, all these different things you're doing at the same time with science communication and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, JD and the Data Hub for having me. So I wanted to introduce myself to you all. My name is Shifra. My pronouns are she, they, and my educational background is in business analytics, along with a lot of self-taught computer science, math, and writing. Because I think self-teaching is a big part of learning because you can say, hey, here's how I learned this. That wasn't great. Here's how I would improve it. Or if it was great, here's how it could be even better. So as for my sort of path to science communication, I had a very interesting journey, I guess. I have always been an English person and a writer before I was a data scientist or a math person. So that's kind of where I started from. I always loved writing, and that was the piece that connected all the other dots for me. Um, and as I got older and I became a student, we all know the hustle is real. And I decided to tutor because being a student is expensive. So I was tutoring a lot, trying to make money that way. And that really led me to learning how to meet people where they are in their educational and learning journeys and communicate with them at the level that they're on. That means lots of analogies. That means understanding what relates to them in their life experience and sort of bringing whatever material it is to life for them. And basically, everything I've ever learned, I tutor. So that's kind of how I got to that place. From there, I decided to become a data scientist in college. And I saw that you can kind of merge computer science and writing and education into this field called tech writing. So I was like, whatever happens, I have to get into that. And now I have become a tech writer for Data Lemur, which is basically the lead code for data professionals. So lots of SQL, mathematics, and practical data case studies on there if anyone's interested. And as JD mentioned, I also just wrapped a technical writing role for the new crash course, which is Code and Programming for Beginners. It's a Java-based course. And I think that course taught me more than anything just how to bring everything together for a sort of standardized science communication that is designed to relate to the pure beginner. So that is my journey to where I am today.
Well, again, we're seeing skills that transfer over so neatly. I like how you said, I was a writing person or I was a data science person, and it's really easy to put ourselves in these little bubbles and say, this is what I'm good at, or this is what I like to do, this is who I am. But in fact, we're a lot more than those little bubbles. I mean, you can be a parent, you can be in data science, you can be a friend, you can be a writer. I mean, there's like the personal, the technical, and the connection. You know what I mean? They're all aspects of who we are, and I like to see how you're leveraging all of those. Was that a difficult transition though, from like in person to writing, because that's like a whole different medium?
So when you ask about transition, you mean tutoring in person to technical writing?
Correct. Right.
So yeah, that's an interesting question. I think when you're a writer, it's easier. I think written communication is easier for me. You have lots of shots at it. There's usually an
Mm-hmm.
edit round. Crash course, there are 7. So I think written communication can be refined in a way that obviously personal communication like this can't. You have one shot to say the right thing. And that's actually quite a lot of pressure on students and professionals alike. So I found writing to just be the easier option. Also, I think sometimes being a tutor means you're on call and people will send you questions and you send them written responses. So for me, it was really just like kind of taking my notes and formatting them into something that could be a technical writing work product, if that makes sense. So I would just sort of, I was doing all of that already, and then I was getting paid for it. So that was
Yeah,
pretty
the
cool.
getting paid part, that's the fun part too.
That
We're
is
definitely going to
definitely a
come
fun
back
part.
and talk more about how you develop, a good story, or, and you know what I mean? You do more than just write a story. You have to write for somebody else. You have to be a voice for somebody else. And we're going to definitely dive into that in just a little bit as well. But I want to give Ben a chance to introduce himself and explain, Ben, your journey of how you got to where you are in communication and all the other, again, myriad of things that you do to let them know this multifaceted person that you are.
Thanks, JD. You're setting me up to be a lot here. I'm trying to live up to that. So, hey everybody, I am Ben Rush. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a postdoc at UW-Madison, and that is University of Wisconsin, that UW. And I do some machine learning and data science education stuff, but also science communication and teach a little bit. I think I started getting into science communication in undergrad. I was involved with the neuroscience club, so then I did a lot of outreach, trying to teach kids about neuroscience, but also just get them excited about science in general. That continued into my master's program as well. I took a little break doing a couple years of AmeriCorps, which actually looking back now, was still talking about science and like teaching kids about science, even though it wasn't directly like what I would call science communication. So it could have been like nutrition education or like working in a camp, teaching them just kind of the stuff I did in my own journey. And then I started a PhD program at 2017, something like that, 2018. Um, I think that bug for science communication was still there, and I think it slowly started creeping up more and more because I was noticing I was getting really angry in seminars, and I couldn't explain it exactly why. But then I was noticing like, oh, we're spending so much time to try to learn from these experts, and probably just a small percentage of people are really able to engage because, despite us knowing so much as scientists, we have not formally been trained in communication. And that kept growing, and I would talk to friends about that pretty regularly. And in 2020, right before the pandemic, I took this improv for scientists course, which I think really just kind of blew my mind. One, I think it gave me like the confidence to just try things out and get really comfortable in chaos. But that was also really helpful when this whole thing called the pandemic happened, with dealing with the chaos, and it also led me to start this idea of like talking to scientists about their struggles and successes in life and really who they were as people more than just the science that they were doing, because I just felt like we didn't get to hear that as grad students, and that's probably the most important thing as we're thinking about careers going forward and acknowledging that we might not be able to choose where we land up, or having to scrape by with money, as was alluded many times before. So yeah, just trying to see where these people that we view as very successful and almost flawless, how they have actually really screwed up. And word got out. A few friends joined kind of the small media business team. We wound up actually making a podcast for the university. In that time, once like in-person stuff started to resume, I went back and actually started teaching the improv course that I took, which was really fun to do. And at some point, I had to graduate, so I had to put the podcasting stuff on hold, traveled a bit, then started this postdoc in January. And my goal for this year was to continue doing all the improv stuff, but also finally take on the challenge of doing stand-up. And so this past year, I've also been doing stand-up and adding some storytelling. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of science communication here and there. But I think it's been really worthwhile and I think a lot of fun to do along the way.
I keep hearing this like theme of pedagogy, of people starting with some sort of passion to tell others, and it's just then I think teaching is the natural way that you think about that. Rarely people go, hey, you know what? I think the natural way maybe to start a podcast. That may be a little less natural at first, but that is a really cool place to start. I find that really interesting. And it all started with this improv class for science. Explain to me, what does that even look like?
Yeah, so I'm also teaching that right now. So a bunch of fun to do. And so imagine a lot of shy and awkward or uh, really headstrong scientists who want to all, be centers of attention or be absolutely out of the spotlight. They all come, they merge together, and then through a couple of weeks, so it's 6 weeks. It's like 2.5 hours each week, just once a week that they do the class. But go through kind of just the basics of improv, nonverbal communication, uh, verbal communication, working as a team. I think a lot of the fundamentals of soft skills and just showing that most of the time your audience really doesn't care or will not remember you at all, and that's totally fine. And so you're allowed to make mistakes and try things out. You will gain that confidence to go forward. I think that was really helpful for me as a science communicator in my career, but also just like daily living in life. Um, I think even though that class was 1 credit, was probably more profound than all the other classes that I've taken in like the 10 years that I've done in academia.
Wow, that's a really interesting story. We're going to definitely get back to also the podcast and like what it takes to be an effective communicator in that kind of medium. Um, but I do want to kind of go back and ask Briana some questions too, just to get you back in the mix here. You know, we've kind of built this as effective science communications, like all these different methods and ways that we can communicate. Um, how is it that you approach a subject if you're going to communicate something difficult? Or I mean, of course you're going to be a persuasive person. You want people to agree or to help in some way. But how do you get over that barrier? Like, what are some of the best practices that you use for science communication? It's a technical field that we deal with.
Mhm.
And how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned early on in one of my science communication courses was that a lot of people, or you can assume that the smartest person in your audience, let's say, is reading, learning at like a high school level. And I think once I took that part and took it away from like everyone does not have their PhD, everyone does not have their master's, bachelor's even, and really trying to dive into how is this relatable and why is this important. That's something I had to do in the classroom to my students all the time. Like even we talked about polymers, right, one day, and they're like, "Why is this important?" And we're like, there's polymers everywhere. There's plastic, and they were like so fascinated that it was in plastic, or like being hydrophobic, like, oh, it's just like your windshield wipers or your windshield glass. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is like an everyday concept. So I think kind of remembering the human behind the science really helps, or the humanity behind the science, and bringing it to a level that everyone can kind of relate to. I think there's some things that are just like natural, like the air or plants and trees that are like, this is a part of science, what's a part of life. So I think kind of keeping that in mind, and then how we communicate, realizing you don't need all the jargon. And you can if you need to. If you're writing like a paper, of course, you have to kind of use those things. But when you're talking to people or communicating with the average person, just remaining human and being normal, I think sometimes we kind of over exert ourselves to feel like we're more professional, or like maybe even have imposter syndrome, but like none of that matters. We're all trying to figure out, how does this make sense to me? How can I use this information? And what are like the key takeaways?
Yeah, you said a lot of really interesting things there. I think a big one being that although people you say that, some may have a high school level of understanding. The thing is, it doesn't matter who you're talking to, whether they have multiple PhDs or they're an undergraduate that's just starting out. People can be experts in very specific fields. So whatever you're trying to get across, I think you have to understand somebody can be a very intelligent, very well spoken in that very small area, but
Mm-hmm.
in the area that you want to communicate in, they may be a complete novice. And
Exactly.
uh, imposter effect that affects many of us. And the I don't know if it's the antidote, but the opposite would be trying to show that you do know things when you maybe don't, because
Right.
you just it's difficult to ask questions. Um, it pushed yourself out there, so they may not be asking you those questions, and they may need those things brought down. So yeah, definitely not using jargon when it's not necessary.
Right.
Um, I think that is a great idea. How about you, Shifra? I mean, that really kind of transfers right over to where you are when you are writing for somebody else that has a different expertise than you do. How do you go about knowing that and writing for them? And you said that there's like 7 rounds of edits that need to take place. You know, I'm sure that makes you have to put your ego on the floor then, and
Absolutely.
have to be able to communicate and know that um, that whatever your voice was going to say, it's going to be quite altered. How do you go about like getting this technical information and then writing a story or writing it in a way that somebody else is going to say the story?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I think going back to what Brianna said, just to take it one step further, the biggest principle is know your audience. And like Brianna said, if it's a paper, it's going to be mostly read by academics or professionals who are at a high level. And I guess the challenge with Crash Course is you don't know your audience at all. This is YouTube. This is anyone, right? So I guess I kind of think about it with tutoring, where honestly, most math students I've spoken to, they sort of conk out after like fractions, unless they're like a math-based college major or something. So that's kind of my baseline is explain it to somebody who's intelligent, but maybe missing the fundamental skills and has skipped over that or forgotten about it. So that's kind of how I approach it, where the first thing is a memory jog for any prerequisites. And this is the thing I see looked over by non-educators all the time, where it's like, okay, this is a for loop. And what else do you need to know before you teach a for loop in programming? You need to know what iteration is. You need to define that, even though that's not the word that you're teaching them. So there's basically just like whatever concept you're teaching, think about the prerequisites almost as if it's a curriculum in whatever medium it is, and say, okay, before we do this, you need to know X, Y, and Z. Here's a quick run through. If you're not comfortable with it, here are 5 links, and you'll learn that and come back to me. So I think the prerequisites are the most important thing to keep in mind, and basically assume that people know nothing, but just do a quick run through and then provide more resources for in-depth. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think, much more exciting and something that people will want to hear is to constantly emphasize the why of what you're learning before the what and the how. And I think that a lot of social media creators do a good job of this just to like cater to the algorithm and keeping people's attention and stuff. But basically, you want to tell them once you learn this, you'll be able to do X, Y, and Z. And that's why you should pay attention to the hard part right now. I had an English teacher, my favorite English teacher in high school, would always say, "So what?" So keep asking yourself, "So what?" until you don't have to ask anymore. And that's your content. And that's what you build your story or your analogy or your scenario around. And you are now delivering all of this information underneath a larger goal that your student will be invested in. And that's how you keep their attention. And that's how you get their effort, because you're giving them something. You're not forcing something down their throat.
Yeah, I love how you said that because the why it's how every good story is told. You know, you don't introduce a character for a movie series that has a superpower just to show off a superpower. It's boring. You want to know
Right.
why do they have it? Why do they want to use it? You know, and science is um, science is just science fiction that's real. I mean, and it's
True.
not much different. But Ben, you've got a whole other layer to not only engage an audience member in understanding the material and trying to think through what they know, what they don't know, maybe packaging it with um, fun. I mean, your podcast, explain that a little more. I mean, it's not just here's some science, it's a little more interesting than that.
Yeah, I think so I think a little caveat too is like I haven't really written anything in text form of like science communication. I've done different avenues, but with the podcasting, I think I did a decent amount of prep work to know who I was interviewing to begin with. I had all my questions ready that I thought would be interesting for myself. Trying to also think of the audience a little bit of who might be listening. But I felt as I was going forward, the reason for the podcast again was to show all these stories and the faults and failures of scientists that we hold really dear, which is an interesting challenge because sometimes I'd be talking to people across the country or in a different country, and within 60 minutes, I have to have them open up about some of their biggest failures in life. Um, but I think I used a lot of different tactics to make them feel comfortable, like self-deprecating jokes, trying to let them know that they are in control of what is being said and what's not, letting them know that if I ask something that's really personal, they don't have to answer it. I would tell everyone, I don't know where the personal line is for anyone, and I'm not going to assume. So shut me down if you want. And most people were pretty cool with just talking about whatever. I think I also, so that was kind of like the producing part, getting into the interviewing. The interviewing, I think my strategy was to get to these larger questions that I felt was really interesting, but also leave, 50% of the time for organic conversation. If something that's really struck me as interesting or odd, like one of my mentors who I interviewed mentioned she did barrel racing as a high schooler. And I was like, I don't like, what the hell is that? So she was doing like rodeo stuff, and um, I mean, honestly, I don't even remember what it is. If it's like horse and then you try to get barrels. I don't know. Something that I've never heard of. And I was like, I can't be the only one who hasn't done that. Um, and then in the editing and getting ready for the audience, I think it was trying to cut out extra fluff that was maybe a little bit repetitive. um, I think I would try to actually remove some of the science that I would talk about, especially if they really started getting into the weeds. Because I felt like, people are smart; they can look that up more if they want to. But I think they're here more for our podcast for a lot of the personal connections. Um, so that I think, yeah, that's the podcasting stuff, but it's been also interesting. I think the stand up has also been a really fantastic teaching tool to, even in the same night, do the same routine or do the same storytelling, have it go wildly successful in one room and absolutely fail in another. And you don't always know. And I think I would also emphasize that point, like, we are giving our best advice. There's probably sometimes like it's completely blown up in our faces or succeeded and we still have no idea why, but we just kind of keep trying and hope for the best, and hopefully we can pull out some patterns that way.
A little bit of Groundhog Day there, right? You do the exact same thing and you get a slightly different result from the smallest idiosyncrasies that are different, or the audience members themselves. Now, when you do stand up, is there any science in that, or do you just put yourself out there for what you find amusing and like to tell stories with?
Yeah, I really like the crafting, and I would say like my style is I usually have a theme and then talk about that theme for 4 to 5 minutes. Even if people aren't always on board with that, I did like 5 minutes of peanut butter themed stuff, and I don't think people really liked it, but it was a fun challenge for me. But yeah, science has come up in there. I try not to emphasize it so much so I can actually kind of learn where the boundaries are for me. It's interesting because so I live in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a large enough city that you can still be anonymous, but then every once in a while you do have people from work just kind of show up. And so, how much do you want to divulge? Which is the interesting question. Um, I think I try to talk about the more personal things, which relates kind of to the podcast, and I think that's actually really captivating types of material for science presentations too. If you can kind of show why on a personal level that you're really interested, especially if there are stakes, and craft that story. But I've done some bits about just birds in general, specifically my relationship with one particular parrot who was a jerk. Um, and when I was an intern as a zookeeper, I've talked about some of the previous work I did as a PhD student on like bioimaging. Um, but I think I try to spread the science in there as like little dust particles instead of trying to focus narrowly on there. Because I think that goes back to like one of your earlier points is like we can put ourselves into these specific identities, but the truth is everything blends together. And so, yeah, sometimes I think about some science, and sometimes I'm just obsessed with peanut butter at the same time.
You know, I love that actually. Um, I heard this twice from you, and I completely agree. And that's if you find something interesting, your audience is going to find your authenticity in that interesting. Because if you find it interesting, there's a very good chance somebody else is going to find that very particular aspect interesting. Science can be dry sometimes, and there are really interesting angles. If you find them, you can connect with them. And I really liked also how you talked about giving the power over. I feel there are many people that when you are talking science, it's like science and math. They're wed together in many ways. They're intimidated, and they feel like it has all the power over them, and it's very difficult to engage if you feel powerless. Um, Now, how do we make people feel powerful? I mean, you had your method of self-deprecation that may not work for everybody, but you've already admitted, right? That we all have to find our own version of it. Shifra, you have like so much energy that comes off of you. You immediately feel that your passion for what you do and what you think and feel are right out there, and I'm sure people connect with that very quickly. Um, I am going to kind of switch gears a little bit though, because I think if you're a novice at science communication, this is all pretty interesting. But I find that the biggest questions I hear in science communication is that first wall. And I don't want to like take away and tell too long a story, but when I was a teacher for 21 years, when I was in high school, my counselor told me, "Hey, I think you would make a great teacher." I was interested in science, and I said, "No, thanks," because I did not want to get up in front of people. At that point in my life, it was not a thing. I'd already cut that out. That could not be me. I was like, nope, that's impossible. So I think that is, I want to know like your guys' thoughts. How did you get over that? For me, it was just called growing up a little bit and becoming confident in who you are, and growing past that. But I do think it takes a thoughtful method to get past that first initiation of not wanting to be in front of everybody. So I'm just trying to pick your guys' brains. How do you deal with like the anxiety of talking or the fear of crowds? I think that is something that a lot of our beginning science communicators may worry about. I'll just open it up, whoever wants to go.
I think it goes back to what Ben said before about improv, and I wish that I got to take an improv science class. That sounds incredible. But you just do it poorly. Like it's just gonna be bad in the beginning, and this is something that people don't talk about a lot. I wish they did, but you're just not gonna do something well the first time. It's not gonna be good. It'll be maybe it won't be as bad as someone else if you have like a natural talent for it, but if you just tell someone like, "Hey, I'm doing well in this career, and I was bad my first time too," then there's no difference between like me and someone just starting out or someone with 20 years of experience and someone just starting out. We're all kind of starting from the same place. And if you just have to be okay with, yeah, it's not going to go so well the first time and that's not going to be my best work. And that's okay because you need to, I mean, this has been said a million times, but if you want to get to the good 10th project or the good 10th speech, you have to do the first 9 bad ones, basically. And just be okay with it. And also, it's probably not going to be as bad as you think. So like I think that being brave is being anxious and doing it anyway. Which I mean, I was a little nervous going into this. This is the Zoom room. This is maybe less scary for some people, or more scary than in person. I know that people have different perspectives on that, but you're going to be so proud of yourself for being a little bit scared and doing it anyway. And that is what's going to help you grow your confidence more than any rehearsal or any praise from other people. Just do it and prove to yourself and keep. I'm a data scientist. Keep showing yourself that data, that evidence, and eventually you'll get there.
Yeah, I love that. And you said that too, Ben. It's okay to fail. Briana, tell me the difference of communicating when you were faced with a classroom as opposed to maybe a boardroom. Two different worlds that you've probably had to face down some customers in life. And I'm sure that they both produced different anxieties. And how did you deal with that?
No, definitely. So I think I was gonna say that too. What helped me was like I was practicing in front of middle schoolers, right? And it was like, well, like they don't, I'm not saying they don't know anything, but it was like, confidence is key. You go out there, and middle schools are really tough critics, right? Like they'll probably mess you up on anything but the content. So I think using them as practice and realizing like, and we're learning together, right? I think when you get out of the mindset that like I'm speaking to you and I'm speaking with you and we're in a space, a shared space where we can both learn, I think that helped me. But yeah, the boardroom thing, I think that was just a confidence is key too, right? I think I was more conscious of myself than they were. Yes, baby. 1 second. And so they trusted me a lot more than I trusted myself, and really realizing that the people like who are usually watching you, some people do want you to fail, but I think most people more times than not do want you to succeed, and realizing like again we're working together and not it's not a competition. I think really helped. And so like everyone's already said, you fail. I think getting out of this mindset of perfectionism really helps. In that no one knows the script, right? Like I have these board slides, but like they don't know what's supposed to come. They don't know how it's supposed to sound, the order, the flow. And so remembering that like I am in control of this moment and it can go however I want it to go. And, pivoting, being flexible, I think those kinds of traits really help. But definitely two different worlds, the classroom and the boardroom, but they work differently and prepared me for both. So
Awesome. Before I open up to our audience, if they have any questions, I do want to kind of put in everybody's brain this thing that's just hanging out there that we're all exposed to now, and it really is changing communication. I mean, first of all, that's social media, and now the development of the large language models and their ability to communicate well and poorly at the exact same time. Puts a whole new layer of how do we communicate, use these tools. I'm just putting that out there right now, just to think about. And if anyone else has any questions about those, I want to give our audience a chance. Now, of course, I love talking, and I can talk forever, but I want you guys to have your chance to ask your questions, to let our experts here know what parts of science communication have you done that you have questions about that you'd like to improve. That's what they're here for. Alexandra, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question to all the experts. What would you advise to a student who would want to try themselves in science writing and communication? What are the strategies that you would advise me as the one who wants to try that to follow and be successful in that field? Thank you.
All right, that's a great question, because I mean, she's literally asking, if you want to communicate in science, you have to know science to begin with. But where do you go from there if you want to explore media or all these very different paths?
I could go first. So first of all, thank you for your questions, a really good one. So like JD said, assuming a knowledge baseline of expertise in your field and what you want to talk about, I think a really underrated thing to do is read. Read documentation for code, read papers, read English books that are maybe at a higher reading level than you normally do, and see what feels like good writing to you, what draws you in, what turns you off, what makes you stop reading. So that's the first thing. That's like research, right? It's just reading. Then for the writing, it's kind of the same thing. So it's commenting your code, not these one-line comments that are like, this does something, but these well thought out doc strings. Or if you're doing a non-coding type of science project, it's documenting every step of the way for your project to make sure that you can explain what you're doing, and also that you're not going to forget what you're doing later, because a lot of us will forget little details of our projects. So that's a little benefit of doing things this way. So then the other thing to think about is multiple mediums. So now you know how to document your own work. Now thinking about putting that into a poster, putting that into a slide deck, putting that into a one sheet or summary. So if somebody has 2 minutes to hear about your work, make it that short format for them. So now you practice long detailed form and also short form. I also highly recommend Medium articles or writing on LinkedIn for your career. That's huge right now. A lot more people are doing it, so it's a little harder to get noticed, but I think it's still like a great way to practice and get your name out there. And then Imagine how impressed someone would be in a job interview if you say, "Oh yeah, you want to hear about my project? I'll explain it to you with this one sheeter and link to a Medium article, and also here's a slideshow if you want to go through the details." Like that's a master communicator. And I think the biggest takeaway that I could give to students is looking at two candidates, either in academia or in industry, two candidates of equal technical ability, they will always pick the better communicator. So in a world where everybody knows science or everyone knows computer science and coding, that is what sets you apart. Um, so yeah. And then the one other thing I would share is if you want bonus points for practicing documentation, PowerPoint, articles, whatever, you can challenge yourself to write a technical version and a non-technical version. So how do you explain this to your peer in the academic world versus how would you explain this to a high schooler or a first year undergrad? So if you can challenge yourself to master both of those, you're in great shape.
That reminds me, Shifra, of a YouTube series where you need to explain it something complicated like gravity to a kindergartner, then to like a high
I
school
love that
freshman.
series.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're just practicing, you're working out your own brain for your own ideas. How about Ben or Briana? What do you guys think about that? What direction should a student like Alexandra take if she wants to be into communication science?
Yeah, I think we already covered a lot, so that was awesome. And just piggybacking off of that, so blogging is very popular. Even if you're interested in journals, some journals allow submissions if you want to do like more formal writing, if you want it on your resume. Um, something op-eds too. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but it's kind of like your own personal opinion on a specific topic. It can be science related. It doesn't have to be science related, but it's like local, more so you're like a local newspaper kind of thing. And I think that's important too because you want to get in touch with your community. What's important in the Midwest might not be important in the South, and I think kind of touching base with experts in your community, people who have those same interests, it'll also build. It's a two for one. You get community and you get your science out there, or your opinion out there, your information and research out there. But I think something that's less like technical is just like finding mentors and or networking. I'm a big LinkedIn person, but just finding people who you see doing the things you want to do and just saying, hey, like, can we chat, or informational interviews, those kinds of things, I think go a long way.
Yeah, that's great advice. Ben, any advice from you on this subject?
Sure. Yeah, I brought a book with me all the way to my desk from another room that I felt like was one of the most helpful books I've ever read in communication science, and it is. Okay, there we go. Unfortunately, it's backwards, maybe, but it is.
We see it. We see it fine.
Okay, cool, good. Strategic Science Communication, and this is written by very leading experts. I think even in our field, you called me an expert. I don't even consider myself necessarily an expert. I consider these people experts, but that's all relative. And they go through actual techniques and the evidence that you could use to connect with an audience even better than just kind of flinging facts at them. So as you're also thinking about what you would want to do, I think one of the best things that I realized about myself and like what types of communications that I wanted to do was think about what am I actually listening to right now? Because you could have infinite possibilities to watch, write, listen. Chances are whatever you are engaging in right now is probably something that you're passionate about. Then thinking what type of medium, who are you actually engaging with? If you have favorite authors, you have favorite podcasters, why do you like them and why do you hate others? What traits do you really admire about those people that you would bring forth? And then I'm sure even like if you consider yourself a beginner, there are probably some times that you felt you've really shined in a presentation and times that you felt like you've absolutely sucked. What are those differences? What is something that you want to improve upon? What are something you want to let go of? I think that can maybe help you get in an arena to maybe try, and it is a lot of trying and just doing. And I'd also add that you have your own unique perspective, which I think can grant a lot of authority. Like I can't tell anyone about your perspective more than you can. So if it is a mix of your own science or what you find interesting about science, how that is connected to childhood, high school, maybe your future, only you can communicate that and you'd be automatically an expert on it. even if it's just kind of playing around and being experimenting. And I think I'd also add, if you are so trying to experiment, you don't have to go all in either. You can try maybe, a couple times a year, see if that fits into a schedule and you still can maintain sanity. I think probably all of us is probably have ebbs and flows as science communicators on here, not just kind of like on and off, like hardcore science communication and then not any. And then JD mentioned AI. I think now you could probably give some decent enough prompts to some of these AI or large language model interfaces to act as a potential audience, have them take on a role as a practice thing, or say you want to talk about a certain realm, they can help you edit things down faster. I don't say like take everything they're printing out as the correct thing forever, but I think it's a nice conversation partner if you need one and don't necessarily feel comfortable yet to go to friends and colleagues.
What an interesting perspective, Ben. I think that is something I haven't heard a lot before. I've heard some similar, but I love that perspective of using an AI as like a conversation partner to get your ideas out and kind of reflect on what you've said and does it make sense, and have that partner say things back to you, and especially again, science being a more technical field of what they're using. And I do want to mention that Briana made a little note here in this, like trusting yourself. And I know, Alexandra, you have a very interesting background for yourself, and that I think leveraging that is something you've known personally you want to do, and I hope you continue to do that. Were there any other questions or comments I could field? Rachel, come on up and tell us what you'd like to ask.
Hi, thank you so much. First of all, I just want to thank all the speakers, Ben, Briana, and Shifra. I really enjoyed listening to your insights and thoughts on this subject. My question is, if you could share with us, is there someone that you hold up as a really excellent paradigm for science communication, someone who's both technical and able to reach across to different audiences and communicate effectively? Who are your mentors in this area?
What a great question. Who would like to field that?
I could go first again unless someone else wants.
Go for it.
I'll just plug my bosses here. So my mentor, Nick Singh, wrote the book, Ace the Data Science Interview. If anyone's interested in a career, data science, data engineering, data analytics, he talks about data science and he talks about neural networks and very technical machine learning and very difficult code. And he also talks about Drake and hip hop and cars and food. And he brings everything to, I would say, an especially friendly energy for Gen Z, but really for everybody. And he just makes everything feel doable. He makes you feel like you're on the same level. He's not talking down to you at all, even if you're a pure beginner learning Python for the first time. So I would say he's definitely one for me. And then, yes, I can definitely put him in the chat. Also link the book if you guys like. And the other one for me is the CEO of Crash Course, Hank Green, who is a world-renowned YouTuber and science communicator. I think his background is in biochem. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on that. You can find it on his Wikipedia. But this is a scientist turned YouTuber turned professional science communicator who writes and delivers with his own flair that is just so effective and so engaging. And I aspire to be as good as him one day.
That's incredible. He's definitely one of mine as well. I remember teaching once, and a student said, "You sound like Hank Green. Is he stealing your material?" And
what a compliment!
I had to tell them he's not stealing my material, guys. The stealing's the other direction. But those are great. Briana, do you have any mentors out there that you feel like that is the epitome of science communication?
Yeah, I have two that come to mind. One is really cheesy and corny, but he's great. Bill Nye, like not just because we were kids, but I think as we've developed and he's really like honed in on interacting with different audiences and science engagement, I think he's turned into a great speaker and someone to learn from. But there's another person. I'm really big into racial justice, social justice, in the STEM field too. And so I don't know if you all are familiar with Ruha Benjamin, but she is a tech. No, tech. Sorry, this is my toddler who's like really excited to say hi. Say hi, Harriet. And she's really great, and I can drop her information in the chat. But she is really has a sociologist background, but ties a lot of it into AI, technology, and STEM. So I think that's a great person. I've heard her speak. She spoke at one of our symposia a couple years ago, and is really influential for sure.
Awesome. Were there any other questions out there? I saw that, yeah, Zach.
Yeah, so thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate all the insights. Ben mentioned that leveraging large language models can be helpful for yourself as a fake audience member. And I was curious to hear other applications of that technology that the experts think can be valuable both to themselves and to their audiences.
Ben, I'll let you kind of tee that one up.
I have strong thoughts on this one. I have found it so incredibly helpful. I think I started seeing the power of it of just going between like different programming languages. But then I started to see in line with this book, how could I actually communicate my research to a group that might be hesitant to adopt or take lessons from that. So I kind of build like this combination of like a Google form and spreadsheet, and then I use some of the plugins to feed that into GPT. But essentially I was putting my information into this form where it's who I am, my research, my position, stuff I like to do for fun. Then I asked ChatGPT to suggest 10 personal values that I might have. Okay, so then we got that side, me. Then I was like, here's my audience. And I tested it out. So a little bit of background, like I do kind of public health radiology. So using CT scans from people's health records to kind of redefine like what biological age and see if we can see what tissue health is over long term. But that can lead into privacy concerns. So my audience was like AARP. Maybe it's people who are like middle aged, mostly white, maybe less tech literate, maybe more conservative. Then I said, ChatGPT, what are 10 personal values these people might have? And they gave me a list. And then I said, okay, ChatGPT, match our personal values. Then, based on my research and potential fears of this audience, generate an introduction for me of how I could connect to this audience in a warm, engaging tone, and show them, explicitly say, your fears are valid, I'm here to address them, and we're gonna go together kind of as a group working together. And then with that, it does a pretty good job. I was really blown away with that. And then you can follow up and say, okay, turn that into like an upcoming social media post, turn that into a presentation outline with several bullets. But it's pretty accurate of being able to connect on values, think about your norms, still your research, conversation partners. I do pay that extra $20 a month for the ChatGPT 4, and I think it is extremely well worth it. And those are like the ideas that I've had, and I'm sure there are way more out there too.
Oh, Ben, I think those are great ideas because it is very easy to think of this as just something that will take away from what others do, but instead showing how, just like Google, when Google first came around, you thought, well, all of mankind's knowledge is now just a search bar away, but it's not. It's more complicated than that. And to hear it's kind of like your new prompts. That's going to be the new person who can Google, right? The person who can find those answers. It's the new person who can use those prompts effectively, not to replace what they do, but to augment and do what they do faster. And really in a better way, because we've all talked about how we need to fail. That could be the place where you get to fail and go, wow, I wouldn't have not known that these people would have these views. I just didn't, or I wouldn't know how I would connect. Like we share these particular values. And that's just one small aspect. I really like that. I think that's super interesting. Yeah.
It's also,
Are there any other questions or any other people want
can I
to
add like
comment
one
even?
comment to that too? My hope is I like there's a small chance I wind up studying this stuff in the future too, which would be really interesting to see. But I think it's also good for us as communicators to see, kind of like you were saying, JD, like the values. But even though we're interacting with a statistical model, it is probably helping us build our own empathy and thus become better communicators beyond just what we're talking about to the machine too. Which is kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that,
Good.
building
Yeah,
empathy
good.
as well. You know, my kids, they love Robo Christopher the vacuum. He is a member of the family now, and he is not near as interactive as any large language models. Kushi, you had a question?
I kind of changed my mind. I feel like you guys covered it in some degrees. But my question was, I mean, I'll say it anyway. Or also, first of all, thank you so much for. I apologize for coming so late. But even the very little that I've joined, I've been benefiting from you guys' comments. So thank you so much. But my question was, how do you, when looking for jobs in companies, right, and explain if your experiences in data science or large language models or things like that, um, I'm surprised. I was in my very like little bubble, and I thought most companies value that kind of experience. But instead I found most of the companies and recruiters that I talk to, they're actually apprehensive to the word AI or data science, and they're like, ah, that's not one of our priorities. Like we don't want to work about that, or they're like skeptical of it. In terms of communicating it and trying to show the value, how do you guys deal with those kind of situations where people are apprehensive to it?
That's a good question. You know, in a world where, especially undergraduate, graduate students in the university, if we're in the university, guys, we are in the cutting edge of technology, science, ideas, and industry is not typically on the cutting edge of these ideas. Any ideas here, though, from our experts about how do we communicate that to the company that that's an important aspect of their business model? Any ideas?
So I think I'll try to take this one. So first of all, Kushi, thank you for your question. I will tell you, I have not experienced this. Maybe it's just because the jobs I apply to are data jobs, so they are looking for those things when I apply typically. Um, but I think the biggest thing for companies, like JD said, they're not at the cutting edge. So companies sometimes want a large language model, but what they really need is like a dashboard that tells them how many sales of the product they had this month, right? So what you need to show, I think, in that situation is that what's a good analogy for this? I won't say an analogy, but knowledge of cutting edge data science and AI is the highest level of what you know. And you also know summary statistics, and you also know dashboarding, and you also know Python, and you also know SQL, and you know how to get them the monthly reports that they need. And that's just an example of a company with a concrete product. But essentially what I'm saying is you also know all of the prerequisite skills required to understand the architecture of a transformer LLM, right? So you don't just know ChatGPT. You also know all the other things that the company actually needs to function and to report and to present and to show to gain valuable insights that they can share with their C-level managers. So I guess basically that you also know everything underlying data science and AI, which is what they're actually looking for. And I think that's the other trick that was maybe underlying your question, is that recruiters don't know this space. And the job titles and the job descriptions are incredibly fuzzy and sometimes mislabeled. I had a really funny situation, very quick story time, where a recruiter was bugging me that I didn't have ETL on my resume. Now, for anyone who might not know, ETL stands for extract, transform, load. It's like kind of just a collection of all the data skills. And of course, all of these data tools and skills are all over my resume, but this recruiter doesn't even know what ETL stands for. So he doesn't know that like BigQuery applies, for example. So I took his advice and I put ETL on my resume for any other future oblivious recruiters. And not to hate on recruiters, they work very hard, but they just don't know this space the way that we do inside it. So if you could just show them like, okay, I have the really high level stuff. Your company's probably not there yet. Your company's data engineering might need some work, but I can help you with all the things you do have. And I know the cutting edge stuff. So when we get there, I'll be ready for that. And just kind of like almost reassure them is my advice.
So it's kind of like the cutting edge is the whipped cream on top of the sundae. You
Yeah,
can't
no,
lead with it, but it definitely makes it all better.
the companies
Jordan, you had a
want the whipped
question.
cream. just to finish up, companies want the whipped cream. They don't even have the cone. That's like kind of how I look at it. And anyway, that'll be it. I'll let everyone.
Basically, you're willing to guide them with the groundwork needed for that whipped cream.
Yes,
Very
absolutely.
good way to restate that. Yeah. Jordan, did you have a question?
Yeah. Hey, so first, just want to thank all the speakers. It's been really insightful. And thanks, JD, for inviting me.
Oh, you're
Very
welcome.
cool. So my like one thing that like is my biggest fear going into the workforce is like the imposter syndrome. And I know like one of you mentioned that about how you just kind of have to like fake it till you make it and be like sorry, I was reading the chat. Like be confident in your skills. So I think like my question specifically with like being a woman in like specific like the computer science field, like I just graduated in May with computer science and stats, and I'm doing my master's for stats. I think that's a really big thing that can be daunting because there's kind of already the expectation that there's going to be the gender gap. So how do you navigate that?
I think what she's really asking, let you make sure I'm restating
Yeah.
this right, Jordan, that to be an effective communicator, we're putting everybody on the same level, and we don't all end or start on that same level. People have expectations of who we are before we ever get there. Yours is you're obviously feeling it, especially in a field of data science and mathematics, of being a woman. And how do we, and all of us, how do we overcome that, either our internal feeling that we're starting lower, or it may not be internal, it may be external, that people are having different expectations and ideas of who we are in this field. I'll
Yeah,
let
I
any of
do.
our
Sorry,
speakers.
that's like a good point to bring up where it's like not always external. Like when you think of like sexism, you think so blatant, like what they show like in media. But that's just a lot of it is just like inherent bias where it's like they've grown up with those beliefs from their family and they don't even realizing that they're like seeing you in a different light because you're not like a straight white man.
I like totally resonate with that. But for me, it's like that fake it till you make it, but like just like pretend nothing. Like, so when I go in environments where I'm the only girl doing something technical, it happens all the time. I'm sure it happens to a lot of you guys. I'll just pretend to ignore their biases. I'll ignore everything they're saying. And then eventually they realize that you're capable and they stop judging you by your gender. So you have to like fight through that inertia until people realize that, your gender doesn't matter. And I think actions speak louder than words sometimes. And you just got to wait and be patient and sort of, I know it's not ideal, but deal with people having their biases and just pretend like it doesn't matter. Like, I'm equal. I'm here. I'm just like you. Our genders doesn't make a difference. Our difference in gender doesn't make a difference in our intelligence.
Yeah, I think that these are all good ways. I think you have to understand also that in the end, you have to be you, right? And the people who will appreciate who you are for what you have to bring will find that you are excellent at what you do. And the people who don't, there may be no amount of communication that's going to be able to change that, and that's not your job. But you want to still be the best version of you to communicate that. And again, no matter who you are or what background you're coming from, at least that's my perspective. But I should let our guests speak on this because that's exactly what we have you here for.
Yeah, I can kick us off and then feel free, Ben or Shifra. But so yeah, I think that's a really important question too. So not only am I a woman, I'm a Black woman too. So I think in the science space, in academia, I went to predominantly white institutions for my bachelor's and master's. I think things like that showed up. Even being, I'm an executive leader at my nonprofit and one of few in the space doing that. And I think, as JD said, I was going to type in the chat and put authenticity. I think that's super important, and just showing up as your authentic self, and kind of breaking those stereotypes when you speak, when you show up, and really being present, and also being open to letting people learn. Again, I think inviting people to spaces and showing them like yeah, you might not know, you may have never met anyone like me, talk to me, but we can learn and grow together if you're willing, but also knowing when to kind of step away too, because I don't think that's like everybody's fight all the time. And so really learning when you want to exert that energy and when you can just say, hey, well, here's some resources, and you just keep doing the work. I think by doing the work, you're living in that truth and showing how you can pave the way and open those spaces and change systems. But really just trying to figure out like what is your fight, that why that we've kind of talked about too, even when it comes to like gender gaps and what you're trying to accomplish within your role in your space. So happy to talk more about that offline, but that's just some initial thoughts.
Well, guys, we've had an incredibly great conversation about uh, science communication, and it leads back into the heart of that we're people and we can be hurt and we put ourselves out there. You know, when you communicate, it's a personal thing. You're putting a little piece of you out there, and you have to expect that not everybody's going to appreciate it, but you just keep plugging away. I think we have had a great conversation. We've gone past our predicted hour a little bit, but I think it was well worth it. And I want to again thank all of my experts that decided to be here with us: Ben Rush, uh, Briana Brown, and where are you? There, I'm looking through my screen like I don't know the names or something. Shifra Isaacs, I really appreciate you being here. And I want to give you a chance to sign off if you want to, but otherwise, um, thank you very much for coming. And this will be up on our YouTube channel, and it'll probably be linked on LinkedIn as well. So thank you very much. And I'll give you guys a chance to sign off if you'd like to. Any last words?
I guess just signing off. Communication matters no matter what job you do, no matter who you are. You have people in your life that you care about communicating with. You have probably a job that you care about communicating well in. And I appreciate everyone giving that the attention it deserves. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It was so great, panelists. Y'all are amazing. Audience, thank you for engaging, and keep using your voice for good. It's my final piece.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. The journey, I think, to become a communicator never stops. You know, try to get better along the way. It's going to be awkward and rough in the beginning, but it makes it really worthwhile. Something that is morbid, but always helps me keep everything in perspective is remembering that we're all going to die. So things seem really tough and stressful, but in the end, like it's going to be okay. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And remember, you've gotten through every single day you've experienced so far at this point, and that'll keep up.
Well, Ben, on that, we're going to end it. I didn't know that could be a punchline and we're all going to die. But you know what? I smiled when you said it because it's true. And we really do fret over the small things. And I appreciate you putting that in perspective. Thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a good night.